Today I'm speaking with Molly Nagler, who is the Chief Learning Officer at Pepsi. Molly is passionate about developing a learning strategy for employees that fits their needs. Molly and I talk about the importance of fostering creativity and what it really means for an organization to have a strong learning culture. Hi, Molly. It's so wonderful to see you.
Kelly, thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
It's my absolute pleasure, and definitely the team's absolute pleasure. I think the first question that I wanted to get into with you was understanding your journey into executive education. How did you start on this career path? And then how did you land in such an amazing role that I bet you shape, I know you shape every single day as the Chief Learning Officer at Pepsi?
Education in my family has always been a big deal and something that I grew up just knowing was important, right, for success and happiness in life. I wound up going to UC Berkeley to get a graduate degree in public policy, which is a sort of a random choice for someone who winds up being a chief learning officer. But I learned some really good analytical skills that I use all the time. So I don't regret it. And it was a great experience. And UC Berkeley has, I think, the highest number of first generation college students in the country. And so it was this incredibly inspiring atmosphere where people go and transform their lives. And so I knew after being there that I wanted to stay in higher education, but I wanted to serve, the non-traditional learner in the sense of adults, right? Like people who had already gotten all the degrees they ever intend to get. And because careers are long and jobs change frequently, that they wanted to, go back to school for small interventions here and there for specific needs, like a women's leadership program or a negotiations program. So I stayed at Berkeley and I worked at the Haas School of Business in their executive education department, working on customized programs for companies. And then I moved over to Yale School of Management and wound up running executive education there and got to start up some online learning programs as well as more open enrollment rather than just customized for companies. And I really enjoyed that. The one thing that you don't get at a university is the ability to see the impact of learning over time because people come and go. And so it's this amazing, refreshing vitality, but you're not sure the impact that you've made. And so when I got the chance to come to PepsiCo and install myself for a long period of time in one company to see really what learning is capable of, I just couldn't pass that up. And we also have 270,000 employees globally, so I would have had to stay at Yale a really long time to serve that many people. That's absolutely why I decided to come to PepsiCo in February of 2019.
So I think one of the things that really stands out in your journey was the starting point and that interest in analytics. And I'm sure at PepsiCo, that is something that distinguishes you not only in the spirit of the learning and the passion and making an impact on people's lives, but it's that interest and passion for analytics.
Yeah, so we're still really early in our learning analytics journey. And traditionally, learning people might feel like they're really just designers or they're program managers and they're there to add to the curriculum at a company. But, we're responsible for going beyond that to business outcomes and impact on careers. And it's very hard to measure. It's very hard to draw a direct line from going to a 5-day leadership program to being promoted 3 years later, right? We all know that there's tons of different things that are happening in someone's career and the business. Timing matters, all sorts of things, but that doesn't mean that you give up trying. So what we're looking at now is trying to map career outcomes and business outcomes to different talent initiatives that we do at PepsiCo. One thing that we care about is networking, right? At PepsiCo, your network size and your network diversity and breadth, because in a really large company, it's important to know where to go and know who to ask and to get things done. So we looked at a program we launched called Being Visible Virtually. And we did that during the end of the pandemic to help people, understand how to keep their network going. And after we ran the program, we looked at organizational network analysis to see if their network sizes and diversity had changed. The size did increase, and our amazing HR analytics team was able to pinpoint that 14% of that increase was due to the program. So it was amazing to get that level of precision, and also really rewarding to have contributed to that. Another way we're looking at learning analytics is with our diversity and inclusion training. So we want to know if folks who complete the training development that we offer on how to be an inclusive manager and how to be an ally and that sort of thing, whether managers are better mentors afterward or whether they spend more time mentoring. We look at, do they have more one-to-ones with their direct reports? So far, the early data is really promising there. So you'd also want to look at other things like selection of candidates for open roles and promotions and things, but those are much longer term. And so in the short term, you can look at things like their behavior through the meeting patterns analysis.
That's fantastic. I love hearing about the depth and rigor on analytics, even when you kind of have to make do. You want to measure that long-term impact, like you said, 3 years out. How do you know today's thing can be a causal mechanism of this thing 3 years out? But sometimes you kind of still have to have that commitment to analytics in the first place to find those proxy measures to at least start that journey of creating a relationship between a program and understanding its impact.
Exactly. And, we also do, of course, we look at participant reaction and satisfaction because, just that sort of buzz around your programming and that are you enjoying it? There's sorts of things that make learning more sticky. And so we'll benchmark those satisfaction scores against external companies. We partner with a business school called IMD to look at their database of executive programs and their satisfaction scores and benchmark against our own and to understand, at least how we're performing at that level.
So one of the things that I know that you're passionate about is a learning culture and building a learning culture. What does that mean to you? Let's share your wonderful vision on what a learning culture is.
Yeah, learning culture is such a funny term because it can get tossed around as both praise and insult at the same company, right? Oh, we have a great learning culture, or no, we don't have a learning culture at all. And there's nothing to point to disprove either one. And so it's often very ill-defined, a widely used but ill-defined term. And so I found out about a framework about learning culture. It's called the Learning Organization Framework from Karen Watkins and Victoria Marsick. And so they break down learning culture into very specific and actionable things like the organization is connected to its external environment. People are rewarded for learning. People feel comfortable asking questions in meetings. There's ways to capture and share knowledge. And so you can, assess yourself as an organization or as a team against all those things and then build action plans. So I wouldn't say that we've, rolled it out very widely yet, but at least it's something that we talk about and are gearing up to work on and can explain to people when they ask or they start talking about learning culture, that we can just bring it back to reality in that way. And then another way we conceptualize learning culture is through enablers and barriers. So you want to make it as easy as possible to learn. You can't have a learning culture if learning is not available or if it's hard to find, if there's a lot of friction between the learner and the knowledge that they want to gain or the content they want to consume. And so we have a new learner experience platform. We call it PepU Degreed. It uses AI and machine learning to recommend content to you based on your profile and your learning habits. And it's social. So I could follow you, Kelly, and you could follow me. So there's this fun little voyeuristic element to it and allows you to be curious and see what other people are learning. So that's a big way that we've taken friction out of the process. There's also a lot of micro learning and just different types of content. So podcasts, videos, articles. We also want to take away barriers. And the study that we did with your team and with Shelby and her colleagues was to look specifically at barriers to learning. And, again, hearkening back to my earlier point about the job of a learning professional is not just to create more content and more programs. So we wanted to know what was standing in the way of people, or keeping people from learning, if anything. And my hypothesis was that we actually had too much content and people had choice overload. But I was wrong. We do not have too much content. People were generally able to find what they were looking for. They felt supported by their manager to learn, that there was like a decent amount of, a good learning culture, if you will. But time was the biggest barrier and still is the biggest barrier. So people feel like they don't have time to learn. That's a really tough one. I think we could have like an entire session on people's perception of time and how to like make someone feel time wealthy rather than time poor. One way is just the simple act of chunking up learning content so that you can consume it in the flow of work. And that's what the learning platform enables, fortunately. Like a study I found that if people feel like they're pursuing goals that are in conflict, they don't even have to be time-based goals, like my goal to eat healthy food, or my goal to be healthy and my goal to eat tasty chips. They'll feel time constrained. My goal to be a good employee and my goal to be a good parent, for example. And I've been wondering if people feel like their goal to learn conflicts with their goal to get work done, and that it's a zero-sum game, so that we might be able to solve that through a communications campaign or series of campaigns that talk about how learning makes work easier and learning makes work faster and better. And then that might make people feel like they had more time to learn when, of course, we all only have 24 hours in the day, and it wouldn't require me to mess with anybody's calendar, right? Or like even try to make them set aside special time to learn that then gets scheduled over, because that's the way work life is. And we all have a lot of meetings.
So there's a tremendous amount of scientific thinking in what you've described so far. And scientific thinking is what I'm absolutely passionate about, because I believe that it's a way to help organizations sort of cut through the muddle. It's a way to find out what you're curious about, articulate those questions in a way that they can be asked and in a way that excites other people, that stimulates hypotheses about what might be driving that particular problem. Scientific thinking then creates, specific and measurable frameworks to help us to find out, did we actually answer the question? It relies on analytics to help provide the data. It's about going, I was wrong about my hypothesis that this thing was going to work. Like you said, I was wrong on this thing. It's about having that kind of leadership courage and having the data that answers that question and gives you that confidence to go, okay, there's something else going on. Like the relationship between scientific thinking and strategy is so powerful. And you've touched on so many of those fundamental building blocks of scientific thinking. So I'm curious what you think the overall impact is of a learning culture then to something that's even more aspirational, which is how do we tie what we know about leading with purpose to making a better world for all stakeholders? How do you see building a learning culture as serving PepsiCo employees?
So I think this is a wonderful time in our lives for democratizing learning. And it's coming from a lot of different places. I mean, at PepsiCo, our strategy is called Winning with Purpose. We do tons of work through the PepsiCo Foundation with communities in need, whether that's giving meals, like investing in Black-owned restaurants and so forth. Sustainability is also a huge deal. So that's definitely like in the water, so to speak, at PepsiCo, and that, our job as a corporate citizen is very, very important. Everyone in the company has to think, like, how does my job support that? And with learning, it's really about democratizing development within the company. And, everything I've said before about like reducing barriers to learning and reducing frictions and that sort of thing. And it's also just like at a company our size, it's about designing for scale. In learning programs, people want to feel special and they want to feel like they've been selected for something that's really going to take them to the next level because of like their great performance and so forth. And so I think you can deliver on that in the design of a program without sacrificing the scale and reach of your learning agenda. The pandemic has been a bit of a gift in terms of getting everybody on board with online learning. We were sort of in our own way about like believing what needed to be in person and what needed to be online. And now like everyone was forced to pivot. We moved tons of programs online. Learners logged in on Zoom or whatever platform you're using. We're still able to like deliver lively, engaging, informative sessions in an online environment. And so that will absolutely continue after the pandemic, because why would we walk away from this like amazing new mindset and tool set to get more development out to everyone else? That's part of the democratization. The other is that we're making some big commitments in the future about just reskilling in general and investments we're making in the frontline population, and offering like bachelor's and master's degrees through a new partnership that we have. And we've had in the past a traditional tuition reimbursement program, and we're working really hard on expanding that so that people can get in the driver's seats of their careers and grapple with and thrive alongside this digital transformation that we're all going through. So that's how I see purpose. It's really enabling people to do meaningful work and have rewarding careers, whether that's at Pepsi or somewhere else.
That's awesome. There's a lot of innovation in terms of what you said, in terms of new platform, in terms of programs like, finding out what's rewarding to employees, evolving from the tuition reimbursement program to a new model. There were other questions that emerged in our project together. There were actually a number of hypotheses, and you talked about one of them that you thought was going to be a big barrier, which was this issue of too much choice. And it's interesting that was the hypothesis that you thought that would be, probably the biggest barrier. You guys have so many assets available. And that's a very reasonable intuition that it's about too much choice. And we see that actually across lots of different domains, that company leaders think one of the challenges that they have for their customers or for their employees is that they're presenting them with too much choice. But we were able to rule that one out. Mm-hmm. We were also able to rule out another classic one, which is that people weren't really even just kind of aware.
Yeah.
But they were aware. They are aware of the various programs, not of course every single one,
right,
but they're aware that these programs were available to them. And so awareness is often a kind of a thing that leaders think, or about customers or about employees. It's like, this is just a problem of awareness.
Yeah.
That's the case.
I mean, Pepsi's an amazing marketing organization, and we treat our employees like consumers, and we have logos and colorful campaigns and, everything under the sun to get that message out. I think also our leaders are good role models for learning. So our CEO talks about it. The first quarterly town hall we had after the pandemic struck, each of the business units would talk about, what they're up to, their progress and accomplishments. And after the beginning of the pandemic, that meeting and those updates were really about lessons learned. And it wasn't framed that way, but it was like, how am I changing what I'm doing? How am I adjusting my normal routines and decision making to like deal with this emergency, this global emergency that we're in? And so we wound up, after I heard that, my team and I decided that we would write a series of case studies on COVID-19 at PepsiCo so that we could preserve for posterity all these amazing examples of ingenuity, teams that had never worked together before were working together. Like there was no more silo thinking. It was all about end to end. And so we couched the case studies not as like, here's a resource for surviving the next global pandemic. It was very much like, what are the transferable lessons and skills that we've learned at this time that, can apply at any point? Like we'll always face resource constraints, right? We'll always face a staff shortage or a broken supply chain. Just these, like the lessons learned were really much more 30,000 foot than like, we were able to get enough PPE type stuff. It was much more like how the teams work together, how people who had, did not have a leader title were able to contribute, like just step out of their day to day and add more value than would typically be asked or required of them in other circumstances. So it was like just a very inspirational time.
And it's fantastic that that's being documented in a way that works for the future. That's yet another scientific principle. It just goes back in time. If you don't document your discovery, the next person who documents that discovery will get credit for it.
That's right.
So that diligence around documenting those learnings is another part of a scientific culture. So kudos to you and the team for
Thank
seeing
you.
the opportunity and getting it done, and then using that as something to build on for the future.
Thank you. Yeah. No, it's been fun. I mean, again, like COVID has been a time of like deep stress, but also a time of great innovation and pulling together.
Yeah, so another thing that had emerged from the project, which I thought is a very interesting one, is this idea of employees' definition of learning being too narrow, and what they thought learning was, and therefore in their own self-evaluation of whether or not they were engaging in learning was based on this benchmark. But we actually found something very different. We found something that really actually ends up aligning to your philosophy, which is that there are all kinds of learning opportunities that happen inside of companies. And employees do recognize that. But I'd love for you to talk about that some more, because I think that what was explored there is something that's very important for other chief learning officers and leaders of people.
Right. So we looked at whether people were too narrowly defining learning as like sitting in a classroom or reading a book. But we found instead that they understood that, like, reading an article that a friend or colleague sends is learning, that having a one-on-one with someone, going to coffee with someone, watching a TED talk, so that our employees like have a very expansive definition of learning, which is really exciting to me because it's just the truth. First of all, I mean, we want people to feel like they're developing and growing through lots of different interactions and lots of different opportunities. And we'd also done some work in the past before I joined about employees who have more one-on-ones with their boss feel more developed. Not a book was cracked, right? Not a video, like, or whatever, like no syllabus was written. And yet these folks are feeling like they're growing in their role. And I think it's important for the mindset of a learning team to know that they have all these different levers at their disposal. So I think it's just actually as important a lesson for like learning professionals, that people experience learning in lots of different ways and that we can influence those. So like, maybe we should, have a training to teach managers about how to have great one-on-ones or better one-on-one meetings. And that's a learning opportunity. So rather than like, a more formal learning opportunity for the employees, you just like help the managers manage better. And that is like development for the employee, if that makes sense. So
it does.
There's like a lot of ways to skin the cat.
It does. And it ties nicely in with the work on building out the network model.
Yeah.
It's touch point, knowing how to access those resources. That's constantly informing people of a new way to do things. So it just builds on something that people might already have a competency around. It's not an actual barrier to learning. Those paradigms around what is learning are already open. And now you're providing yet another tool to help facilitate that.
That's right. And, people like, at work as an employee, like you want to feel like your company's investing in you, right? If that perception of being invested in can include a lot of different stimuli, like meetings and videos and, the town hall, then that's just going to, I think, increase job satisfaction for everyone, rather than you're like waiting around for that one time a year where you may be going to a formal program.
One of the other, I think, more subtle discoveries that we had in the project goes back to this issue. So the fundamental challenge that we found was people's belief that they didn't have time, right? It's the time scarcity, but underneath that, it's this mental accounting framework that we have for time.
That's right.
We have this mental model, even though we recognize learning happens in so many different ways, There's a little bit of a paradox between how we actually expect learning to happen, this time where I'm sitting down and I'm engaged in learning, and it's just kind of this mental model of what learning looks like. When we asked through our diagnostic tool how people felt about the time that they had, they said, oh, absolutely time's scarce, just not enough time. I wish I had carved out time. But then part of our experiment included this kind of a Trojan horse when we asked people if they would be willing to read an article. I think it was very specific, an 8-page article.
Yeah.
However long it might take a listener to think about, oh, reading an 8-page article. Some of us might think that's pretty quick. Some of us might think that's a 15-minute, 30-minute commitment to get through an 8-page article. So we had them imagine this very specific scenario, and we asked them, when would you have some time? If we were to send this to you, when would you have some time to review that? And it turns out people actually had time. They were able to, oh yeah, I can carve out that 15 minutes or 30 minutes this week, or sometimes it would be next week, but that line of sight on being able to make that time was actually there. And when we dig a little deeper, we find that one of the challenges that people have is in actually just following through, making that time happen, helping them to follow through on those intentions.
Yeah. So a couple things on that. Reaching people in meetings they already have is a great way to reach them with learning and help them follow through on those commitments. So we try to help managers leverage team meetings with things like meeting in a box for a little bit of learning, because you're already there, you have a captive audience, easy. Another thing is book clubs or peer things that make it social. So you're getting this double benefit of building your network around a learning opportunity, or you're getting a break, right? You're having a coffee break and you're learning something with a group of people, or other ways to do that.
Yeah, that just embedding it right, almost in an unrecognizable way that doesn't require that seemingly difficult, tough carve out.
Yeah, exactly. Our learner experience platform, it uses AI and machine learning to recommend resources to you. Sort of like, Amazon, where if you like that, you might like this. I think is also helpful as just a nudge and a feeling of personalization and relevance.
That sparks that curiosity. So
yes.
Instead of telling people, oh, please continue learning new things, instead you serve it up and you facilitate that curiosity, because you're like, oh, what's Molly up to? I want to know what Molly's reading.
Yeah.
So curiosity or the targeted recommendations serve up something, and I'm like, I don't have to be intentional and have a whole learning plan. My curiosity is just driving me there. And that's fantastic to bring both the culture together as well as the technology to make this an easier journey. There's something I'm worried about though. And it's this issue of curiosity. I love to ask a million questions, and I love to ask our clients stuff like, how do you know, all the time? And I get frustrated because I feel that so much of our childlike wonder and our willingness to just ask, you have to ask permission. Is it okay? I'm going to ask a dumb question. It's we have to ask permission to ask something that we're curious about or we don't know the answer about. And it actually, research shows that this actually gets harder over time. The older that people get, the more hesitant we are, the more nervous we are to ask those questions. And so our curiosity just kind of gets, that back burner, we lose that confidence. And I wanted to ask you, because curiosity is so fundamental to the scientific method or strategy or innovation, depending which way you want to look at this. But I'd love to hear your views on curiosity and how do you foster curiosity at PepsiCo?
A few ways. We have a set of kind of values or behaviors that we call the PepsiCo way. And one of them is voice opinions fearlessly. And so a question isn't the same as an opinion, but it sort of is a way of getting at it, right? So where you're saying I don't understand this, or, basically it's okay to say what's on your mind and, in a professional way. So I think that helps a lot. And I hear, people will say that, they're to say it to me, they'll be like, all right, I'm going to voice opinions fearlessly and say, whatever. And then that'll break the ice. And then you'll start to get more questions. And you really need psychological safety for people to have curiosity. And that's something that we teach. And it's also really important for diversity, equity, and inclusion. It shows up in different types of curriculum. Again, I mean, the other way, just, reducing the frictions again, right? So that if you're feeling curious, there's nothing standing in your way of getting access to that knowledge you're seeking. We are going to just on the cusp of rolling out a new talent marketplace at PepsiCo that uses skills data to match you to internal projects, jobs, but also networks. If I have the goal one day of, say, being chief human resource officer, and there's certain skills I know I need to get there, I can go into this platform and find the people that have those skills and reach out to them. And so it's like this self-initiated sort of mentoring or networking. And again, in a big company, like just being able to track down who does what is no small feat. So I'm excited about the potential for this platform. The other one is, you have to wonder if there's an incentive issue with curiosity. Like, how much do you need to incentivize people to be curious or to learn? Maybe that's another project for us, Kelly, but I don't know the answer to that, because I do know that research shows that when people are intrinsically motivated and you layer on extrinsic motivators like cash rewards, it crowds out the intrinsic motivation. I don't know how much incentive we should be giving for people to be curious. We're doing it, looking at badging and credentialing, which I know a lot of companies do very successfully, as a way to give I think like a social cachet incentive for people to earn a badge in a certain area. So we have an internal recognition platform where you can send a smile, and some smiles have points associated with them where you can turn that into gear or prizes or material goods, and others are just like a pat on the back type thing. And so I've sent smiles without any kind of monetary value to folks who are achieve active learner status in our learner platform, or everyone who logged in to the learner experience platform in the first year. So just for because that is public recognition, and it seems like people really appreciate it. I get lots and lots of emails in response, but I mean, the question in my mind is there something like, do you like literally pay people to be curious and learn? Do you give things away? I don't know the answer to that.
It's complicated. On the badging side, we've run experiments in that area, and we can talk about the kinds of, some of the things that work and some of the things that don't work as well. And it's best when we combine these different strategies together, a badge, certain kind of incentive, and some of the other principles can give us the biggest impact to help people achieve their best outcomes.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that. I mean, if you think of the spectrum from the pure innocent curiosity of the child to, the career-oriented skill building, extrinsic rewards feel right for the skill building, but there's just something like impure about like polluting that curiosity with incentives. And maybe that's like my bias, right? That I need to get over. I'd like to unpack that more to understand what incentives make sense on what end of that spectrum.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's some fantastic work because curiosity is such a fundamental part of scientific thinking. And there's work by people that you would be surprised by, like George Lowenstein, for instance, who's looked at the role of curiosity inside of the process of innovation that I think could be very interesting for us to explore together.
All right, let's do it.
So, let's do it. I think so. My last question for you is just about behavioral insights. Why is this important for companies?
Talking about learning for a second, so we'll be going back to the office, but not full time. So it's going to be, you go into the office when the work merits. The same token, I've asked my team, I've told my team that they need to go in at least once a week, because I think that learning is an inherently anthropological profession, and you need to go and see how people are working, where they're running into trouble, where people congregate, what's happening in the cafeteria, what do they do at their desk, so that you can serve them better, right? You can help reduce frictions in their lives. Learning should also be ambient. So maybe it's a poster on the wall. It doesn't, again, informal learning super important. It doesn't have to be a formal class. That's where I see behavioral insights is really getting at a human-centered approach to work. Pepsi's so good at understanding our consumers, and we use a lot of behavioral science in the consumer side of the business. And there's absolutely no reason why we should put up an iron curtain and not use it for our internal, HR initiatives. So, at the end of the day, like, we're here to support the business strategy, and we're here to help people do meaningful work and build rewarding careers. That happens like hour by hour and meeting by meeting. And so to see that in real time and like just think expansively about how learning can support, that's where I see behavioral insights. And that would apply to all kinds of things in HR, like nudging to fill out your performance review, or nudging to get a physical, right? So that, you're using your medical benefits and you're staying healthy. So I think it's anytime you want to influence behavior, that's where behavioral insights helps.
That's fantastic. Well, speaking of thinking expansively, I want to thank you so much. This was an absolute incredible cascade of ideas and thoughts, and also just very inspirational. I love your passion for learning, trying new things, your natural scientific thinking. It's always a delight to talk with you, Molly, and I really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much, Kelly. I really am like a behavioral science geek. In another life, I want to have your job. So maybe we can switch when we're reincarnated or something like that. Thank you so much for having me. It's like such a joy to talk about all this.
Wonderful. Thank you.